And now it's time for your local news update with Steve Hare.
Welcome back to Wake Up Wenatchee Valley. Steve Hare for NCW Live News, joined by Dan Kuntz, our host. And here sitting between us is Captain Edgar Reinfeld with the Wenatchee Police Department, who's joining us now to give us more information on the latest developments in the investigation into the police-involved shooting from last week outside that Albertson store. Certainly, Captain, there are still a lot more questions than there are answers, and I know that you have been working feverishly along with the Special Investigative Unit in trying to piece together what happened. I've asked the captain to join us this morning on our program to walk us through the process of how these types of investigations are conducted and maybe work in a little timeline here as to when you hope to get things wrapped up. Sure. First of all, let's talk about the investigation itself.
Sure. In these investigations in the past, and probably still in many areas of the country, agencies investigate themselves. So an officer from an agency ends up in an officer-involved shooting, and their own detectives, their own command staff, everything come out, do the investigation, and make a determination if there was a criminal act committed by the officer, and then go right into the internal investigation, determine they've complied with policy. Several years ago here, we assembled the North Central Washington Special Investigation Unit, which is Chelan County Sheriff, Douglas County Sheriff, Okanogan County Sheriff, City of East Wenatchee, Wenatchee, and then kind of our accessory partner is Washington State Patrol. As a statewide agency, they don't really sign these compacts or agreements, but they certainly act in these because they bring so much technical skill and equipment to the situation. They also have the crime lab. They have everything that we need to actually work a case all the way through. So once the SIU was formed, we have an incident like this where we have the officer-involved shooting involving our agency. We become the venue agency. It's where the incident occurred. We're no longer the investigation arm for it. Now, the way the structure works, we're still the command structure. Captain Jim West from our department happens to be the SIU commander for the entire thing. Mm-hmm. I'm the assistant commander right now by role. And so we're still the commanders. Our job, though, is strictly to ensure that the process is followed. We will interview no one. We will collect no evidence. We will process any of that business. Chelan County was selected as the lead agency. It could have been any of the other agencies involved that came out on Thursday night when the tones went out. And so in this case, Douglas County had just finished a critical incident by an hour. And we're definitely loaded up with things that needed to be done. You know, all through this week till today, they're still working their case they had right before this incident. That was not an SIU case, it was an internal case. Mm-hmm. And so Chelan County was fresher, Chelan County came up, and Chelan County became the lead agency for this incident.
I see.
And so what that means is all the evidence, all of the interviews, all of the reports, everything will go through Chelan County. The lead investigators from Chelan County, the command for the investigation side is in Chelan County. So where we're at right now is in the criminal investigation phase. This entire phase is simply to determine if the officer's actions were lawful. Period. And so we have to go through everything. Just like any other criminal investigation, we literally have to collect all the evidence possible. And a man died as a result of these actions. So on top of just looking around, it has to be treated like the most intense sorts of investigations. We are literally looking for every scrap of video, every person who may have seen something before, during, or after. We're looking for all of that, pulling it all together. That's why it takes some time.
Well, it's certainly a tragedy, no matter who you're talking about, whether it's Mr. Folden, who lost his life, children lost a father.
Yes.
We do know a lot more about the officer involved, Albert Gonzalez. Yes. But what do you know at this point about the man who was killed in Fulton? What can you tell us about him?
For me, I know relatively little. Like I said, I'm not investigating. I'm the public information officer was my assigned role. I'm literally taking no command or supervisory role in this investigation. The first night, we gathered up out at the scene and we started breaking down some roles and determined early on I would be the PIO for this incident. And so as a PIO, I basically filter feed everything that comes, create the messaging that goes out on the pace that is determined by the SIU as a whole, and with the information that is ready for release. One of the most difficult things in all of this for people to understand is we can only release facts. We can't release opinions. We can't release some sort of conjecture. We can't throw out there our guesses about anything. It's got to be facts, which means we got to verify them 19 different ways if we can manage it. And anything that's not verifiable, we need to probe very, very carefully before we go and put it out there. And so in this, I have not really seen much about Mr. Folden beyond I know he's 31 years old. I know there are a couple of children involved, and I have a basic idea where he worked. Beyond that, I have had no role in looking at his life or the moments leading up to this. And while there are those who will be doing that work and who are doing that work, it's not ready to come out yet.
Well, we're living in a new age, the social media age, and certainly that has played a role here in the investigation. Maybe you can tell us to what extent the social media plays.
So social media is a double-edged sword in many ways. As an agency, when we turn on a Facebook page at the beginning of the year, we rapidly gained a following in a manner we did not expect. We had watched the City of Wenatchee's own page kind of slowly have this arc of growth. And then we went and published information. I think the breakthrough for us was a car that went and straightened out the S-curves down on Chelan and landed inside a building. And just this massive explosion of following and commentary and all these things that really required to be monitored and not just put out there. We've certainly noted and used our social media thing to push a variety of press releases over the course of the year when we've had major incidents. Some tragic, some interesting, some borderline entertaining, and of course to promote community events. So we've done it for all of that. This is the first homicide, effectively, or major incident where someone ended up dead, where we have used it to push out the material. And so the interesting thing is you push out the press releases. Many people have agendas. Everyone has opinions. Some people have several opinions. And they just start flooding in. And the goal with the social media is to be informative, to be transparent, to maintain and develop that sense of public trust, that we're telling you what we can tell you right now, and we're giving it to you directly through the media outlets, through everybody, and then you get feedback. And the interesting thing is the quantity and quality of the feedback that comes. And it's also an appeal. We've used it as a tool to appeal for more witnesses, for people with video or photos to come forward and bring us that side.
And that was the next question I had for you. Captain Edgar Reinfeld with the Special Investigative Unit was investigating this shooting. Numerous people, as I understand, were at the scene of the shooting that night. How many interviews have been conducted so far? I mean, how many people have you talked to? And how consistent has have the statements been? So
throughout this, I think we're well over 20 people now that have been interviewed. There were a number of people present at the scene before and during, and then a lot more arrived after. People heard about it and immediately fled to the area and are up around the perimeter watching. It is something to see. I will agree, watching the crime scene team do their work is strangely interesting and boring at the same time because so much of it is so slow. But I would say we've interviewed over 20 people. As far as consistency, everyone's point of view is a little bit different. We see an arc of consistency that is continuous through all the interviews, but to go and say that guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy all saw exactly the same thing isn't really possible. We have a consistent story that's been achieved across the interviews, but the detail differs so much from person to person, and a lot of it's point of view. We have witnesses that were as far away as 800 feet that saw and heard something. We have witnesses that were as close as probably 100 feet, but had things between them and the scene. So everybody's point of view, and this is always the case when you interview a large number of witnesses, the interesting thing here is we don't have, as far as I know, any real outliers in the interviews. Occasionally when you interview a large group of witnesses, you'll have this very consistent arc and everything looks pretty squared away, and then you'll find the one person who saw something completely different. And it's difficult to reconcile with everything else.
I think a lot of the inconsistencies we're seeing so far, at least in terms of the social media comments that are being shared with us, has to do with the weapon, or whether or not the man was even armed at the time that he was shot. In your news release, you have stated that a knife was found at the scene, correct?
Yes, the knife was recovered right there.
Do we know what kind of a knife?
We do, but we're not commenting yet.
Okay, but it was... that's something that will be coming out later in the investigation.
Absolutely.
So, again, what kind of a timeline are you working with here?
We would hope within a couple of weeks to be able to push a much more complete story, including an absolute timeline, a second-by-second breakdown. A lot is determined on how we get things back. One of the biggest things, the final reports, all that stuff, will be weeks. An autopsy was conducted Tuesday, but now we're going to wait 8 to 10 weeks probably for some of the lab stuff.
Now, why is that important?
to everybody, to finally close and to get the totality of the circumstances together, it matters. It's as simple as we recovered a knife at the scene. Are anyone's fingerprints on the knife? Is anyone's DNA on the knife? That might be as little as 2 weeks. Latent fingerprints don't take long. DNA sometimes takes a while, sometimes it doesn't. DNA seems like kind of a toss-up, but it's run in batches by the State Patrol Crime Lab. This is a high-interest case. It floats higher up in the hierarchy. But if there were say a murder-suicide or something in Western Washington tomorrow or today, it may push it down a step. And it's going to kind of float in there and work its way up to where it's actually run with a batch of DNA. It varies a lot. I don't run the crime lab. Nobody here does. And so it goes as it goes. But things that simple. I mean, that little tiny thing makes all the difference in all of it. And we have to wait for some of that stuff to come back. The toxicology for Mr. Folden will take probably 8 weeks. It always takes 8 weeks. It just does. But it only goes through one lab, through the State Patrol Toxicology Lab. And so we wait.
Depending on the findings of your investigation, would that be passed along to the prosecutor's office, or just where does it go from there?
So this initial wave is the criminal phase, and it is all about were the actions of the officer lawful. Yes, Chelan County Sheriff's Office, Chelan County's Prosecutor's Office, Prosecuting Attorney Doug Shea, will be getting all of this package, and they will make the determination whether the officer's actions lawful. When that criminal phase is done and that determination has been made, our own internal investigation then occurs. The actual investigation is kind of concurrent. They're able to look at material as it comes by. But the final determinations and the final steps are not made until after a determination of lawful or not. And then we go into, was it within policy and procedure? And so there's really 2 steps for the officer involved and for the department itself. Prosecutor looking at, was it a crime? Internal systems looking at what policies complied with as a disciplinary matter.
Understand. Did you have a question, Dan?
You mentioned the officer involved. How is he doing, and what has he been doing over the last, say, 10 days?
So Officer Gonzalez went out on administrative leave last Thursday night, so we're just over a week here. He remains on administrative leave right now. I've talked to him, and he's doing his thing and riding his time on administrative leave. It's one of these things where people always ask, how's he doing? We don't really know all that well how anyone else is doing until we have a real opportunity to sit down and talk with them at length, see where they're at, see if they're ready to return, see where they're at with their life. And so that's a very difficult question to answer, and one I don't feel comfortable trying to say he's doing great, he's doing poorly, he's getting by. And he will sit on administrative leave until he's cleared to return to duty at some time in the future. It may be a matter of weeks, it may be a little bit longer. You know, it varies. There are agencies in this state that would have him back to work already. We're not quite that far forward with policy and with our investigative processes to be able to do that, but hopefully sooner rather than later he'll have an opportunity to return to work.
Captain Reinfeld, I'll give you the last word, your call to action for the community, for more information. Obviously, You're looking for more. We
would like more. We are gotten to the point where we're looking at so much video we collected from the scene. We're pretty sure we have identified, we've confirmed that we've interviewed everybody we can see, but that doesn't mean we saw everybody. If you saw something, if you know somebody, if you have video or photos, please call that tip line at Chelan County Sheriff's Office at 667-6845. Let them know you have information about the shooting so we can get an interview to you. We have multiple investigators from the SIU waiting to interview people that still pop up because we want to get it all.
Congratulations, by the way, on a successful national night out here at the park the other night. Good turnout, and looks like it was pretty positive up there.
It was a very positive event, lots of community involvement, lots of outside agencies we have not necessarily traditionally had there who really brought a lot of information to the table. It was a good night.
Well, thank you very much for joining us
Steve.
this morning on Wake Up Wenatchee Valley. Captain Edgar Reinfeld with the Special Investigative Unit.
21 minutes after the hour, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, sports and everything else that you're used to seeing on Wake Up Wenatchee Valley. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.